This is a good example of something I've been talking about for a while. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the $2,000 iSlab Spectrumica. So $2,000, all right? People have been asking me, like, why spend $2,000 on an IEM? Is it really 10 times better than a $200 IEM? And I keep saying that it kind of comes down to three things, right? One, spending a lot of money, maybe you're going to get something that is exceptionally good. Although I will say stuff that's under $1,000, under $500 is getting so good these days that there's not a whole lot of gains to get in terms of just objective quality by spending more. Two, maybe you just kind of want the story behind it, like the build quality, the physical form factor, and definitely the iSlab has that. But then the other thing that the iSlab has is just a unique tuning, a tonality that is different than what you get, something I'm going to call esoteric. And I think, again, the iSlab Spectrumica is a very good example of that. And what exactly is this IEM? It is a quad-bridge IEM. I've already mentioned $2,000 is the price range, and it is. Let me double check. 4 balanced armatures, 2 electrostats, 1 dynamic driver, and 1 bone conduction driver, all neatly fit into this one IEM. And a quick shout out to Bloom Audio for sending this thing on loan. If you want to check out this IEM, I'll of course have Bloom Audio linked in the description down below. Thank you, Bloom Audio. But with that out of the way, let us go to the table and we'll talk about first the physical form factor on this IEM, what you get inside the box, build quality, stuff like that. Then we'll get into talking about the sound. We'll analyze the frequency response, also kind of give my subjective listening impressions. And then I'll bring in a couple of other IEMs at a similar price point to just kind of situate ourselves in this very expensive IEM range. So here's what you get inside the box. And frankly, like, it's a lot of stuff. And for $2,000, I like to see this. A lot of fanfare, in fact. And this is stuff that I think a lot more IEM companies could be doing. But iSlab, they're doing a good job of it. So where to start? Let's start with the stuff that maybe is a little bit unexpected. You get, I don't know, it was like a keychain or something like that that has the iSlab brand. Again, like if you're spending this much money, you're investing this much money in an IEM, you're going to be a big fan of something, it's kind of cool that you could show it off in ways apart from just wearing the IEM. Like, I think this stuff is cool. I think more IEM should come with stickers, should come with other like pins and stuff like that, but keychain, that's a good option. You do also get a little baggie with these independent holsters, so you can keep your IEMs in there and keep them safe. Not something I personally use. I'm not that worried about my IEMs, but I guess I'm also not regularly spending $2,000 on IEM. So if you are worried about that kind of stuff, it's nice that they include that in the package. Additionally, you get a couple of tools for cleaning. This one is fairly typical, just a little microfiber towel. It's got the iSlab brand on it, but this one I think is like some sort of cleaning gel. I haven't actually opened it. But yeah, that's interesting. I assume somebody knows how to use this. I don't know how to use this, but an interesting touch nonetheless. Of course, you also get a carry case, and this is a very, very nicely built carry case. This is all metal all the way around, except on the top here where I can't tell if this is plastic or like a Gorilla Glass or something like that, but nonetheless, it looks quite nice. And then you've got inside here, it's actually a little bit padded on the bottom, although the sides are just your traditional raw metal connection. It's interesting that it does have what looks like a screw top, but it's actually not a screw top. Those are just seals that kind of hold this in with pressure like that, friction. Okay, the last thing, no, actually, the second to last thing is you get a little warranty card. I think this is kind of cool. It's printed on metal. If you can't tell, this thing is nice and solid. And yeah, this is a demo unit, but ostensibly that would have information about your particular unit that you could use to get your iSlab Spectrumica warranty serviced. I think that's a nice touch. Again, like, you're spending this much money on an IEM or any kind of audio product. It's cool to see the company cares about you and puts that kind of stuff into it. Okay, finally, you get a selection of ear tips. And I'll briefly overview these things. I did not use these ear tips because this is a loaner unit and I got to send this back. But just to highlight, I believe these are these kind of newfangled Elitech Baroque ear tips. I've heard a lot of people talking about these things. They've got a nice rounded shape. They're a little bit on the short side, and the material on them is super, super soft. These over here are kind of a more traditional silicone ear tip with an orange core. And then over here, you've got a foam ear tip. So you've got 3 different styles of ear tips that'll actually give you different styles of fit. And I think that's nice because I recently published a video talking about ear tips, and having access to different styles of ear tips is going to let you experiment with the fit and see what works well for you. And I like to see that. So let's put that to the side, however, and talk about the IEM itself, starting with the cable. And this is a pretty beefy cable, as you might expect on an IEM of this price point, and it's frankly actually pretty nice. You know, a lot of times when you go with a beefy cable, there are trade-offs in terms of ergonomics. Like, it might just be a little bit stiff and a little bit clunky, and sometimes it can be bad and sometimes it can be okay. This one I think is actually pretty good. It's a good balance, but it is definitely still on the stiff side. I'll punch in on it so you can take a look. It almost looks like a cloth cable, but it is in fact wrapped in a silicone jacket, so you're not going to have issues with microphonics or anything like that, and generally it behaves pretty well. It's a little bit memory prone, but that's the sort of thing that you kind of expect with a thick beefy cable like this. You can see it works out really easily. Generally quite nice. It feels premium, and I think the shells, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, are actually lighter than you might expect, but they're kind of beefy and heavy, and so this heavyweight cable I think is a good match for it physically. The Y split is also on the beefy side. This is actually probably not my favorite part of the cable design. I think it looks cool, it's unique, but it is nonetheless pretty chonky and maybe likely to get caught on something. I didn't personally have big issues with it, but you know, if I'm sitting at a desk, a lot of times something like this can be a little bit on the annoying side. It does have kind of a neatly integrated chin slider, although I will say that it's not the most stable. It will more or less fit into place just because this cable is a little bit stiff, but there's not a whole lot of friction here. I wish that there was a little bit more for that chin slider to be maximally useful. But otherwise, you've got your cable that terminates here with preformed ear hooks and a standard 2-pin connection. And then just to highlight here on the IEM itself, it's not a recessed 2-pin, so this should be compatible with any other cable that you want to pull out. Although I will say that I like this cable overall, and I think it's a good match both aesthetically and ergonomically for this IEM. So I don't know. I don't think I would be interested in swapping out this cable. The one thing I guess I'll highlight, I forgot to mention this. So here I've got a 4.4 mil termination on this guy. There's also like an integrated fidget spinner. Like, I don't know what this is about. Is that supposed to be a fidget spinner? It's kind of fun, but I don't know, nonetheless, an interesting quirk and feature of this IEM for all you Doug DeMuro fans out there. Anyway, okay, let's talk about the earpieces, all right? Is that what I want to talk about next? Let's make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, let's talk about these ear shells. Very beautiful shells, and they are a little bit on the chonky side, although I'll show you when it goes into my ear. Fit on this thing is actually pretty good, but in terms of aesthetic, like, it is a very nice looking IEM. It's got a little bit of a gold tint to the outside panel, but then the clear center, and then the very center has got another repeat of that goldish color, which really just gives it kind of like a nice elevated aesthetic. Now, it almost looks like it's a button of some sort, but it's not. This is purely ornamental, but it is, I think, a nice ornamentalness overall. And you can kind of see that there is this very light texturing in the shell. From what I read on their website, this is, they call it an an aerospace grade aluminum. Almost called it regular aluminum there for a second. I don't know exactly what that means, although I will say that it is a very nicely sculpted earpiece that is, again, like I mentioned before, it's surprisingly lightweight. Like, these things look chonky and heavy and bulky, but in terms of weight, like, the weight on these things is actually pretty nice. Like, they feel good and they feel premium, but they don't feel overweight and burdensome, I suppose. I will take off the nozzle, show you the ear tip, or sorry, take off the ear tip and show you the nozzle just briefly. And I guess on that note, let me reach over here and grab my calipers so we can measure this thing together. Make sure we're set at 0. And we've got about a 6.4, oh, there we go, put that in view, about a 6.4 millimeter nozzle on this. So not a super small nozzle, but I'll say that for me, I did not find it to be excessively large. In fact, if anything, you can kind of see that the nozzle is a little bit on the short side, and because of that, it doesn't fit super deep into your ear. So I think likely for most people, the size of the nozzle is not going to be an issue, but hopefully if you know that a nozzle width is going to be an issue for you, hopefully there's enough information in there for you to make an educated decision. Okay, apart from that, I guess I should probably throw this into my ear before I wrap it back up, but just to highlight the shape on this thing, it is kind of a semi-custom molded, although you will see that the custom molding is pretty modest, right? You've got a little bit of a wing in here, and well, you've got a little bit of an antitragus catch here, but I guess, yeah, let me just throw it in my ear and show you exactly what this thing looks like. Hold on, let me pull down that chin slider, throw it in my ear, and voila. Look, are you surprised that that went that much into my ear? I actually am kind of too. I kind of suspected it would be sticking out of my ear more so, but yeah, it generally fits quite comfortably. It is, I would describe probably, it is a medium-large shell, but I don't feel any pressure being exerted on my concha bowl, and generally I find it to be pretty comfortable. And the nozzle, again, is not overly long, just generally a pretty comfortable fit. And even though that aluminum shell has kind of those interesting patterns carved into it, I don't feel any edges or any sharpness or anything like that. So generally pretty good here with the Spectrumica. All right, I like it. Can I be honest? I'm actually legitimately surprised to see that in my ear right now. I thought that it would be sticking out a little bit more. So good job, iSlab. All right, let me wrap this thing back up together and we can talk about the sound here on this IEM, which, you know, the build quality is impressive and certainly a big part of what you pay for with an IEM like this, but also the sound, right? We want to make sure that this thing sounds like we want. And to do that, well, to talk about the sound, let's go over to Squiglink. So this is my frequency response that I've measured of the iSlab Spectrumica. If you want to check this out for yourself, I will have it linked in the description down below. You can go to Squiglink, compare this with a bunch of other IEMs to kind of see roughly what this thing could sound like. But of course, we can do a bit of analysis on this together. And generally, I think what to expect of the sound, I mean, kind of the big thing that stand out here is this. This is a lot of bass on the Spectrumica. This is a very warm, relaxed, I think I used the word esoteric earlier, but definitely this is a sound signature that I think qualifies as esoteric, okay? It is not going for a neutral sound signature. It is not going for your classic V-shaped sound signature. This is going for this really interesting, warm, laid back. You've got somewhat of a recession in the vocals, so the vocals are definitely not the focus of this sound signature. And if anything, I actually found the treble to be a little bit on the dark side, although it does extend quite well and you get a nice bit of sparkliness behind it. So how to describe the sound overall, like, it's esoteric. It's tonal balance wise, it's definitely a bass forward tonality, but I guess that will lead us into talking about more of my subjective listening impressions of this thing. And generally, I think that the Spectrumica, it does what a $2,000 IEM should do, and it's really impressive just kind of right out the gate. Like the first impression on this thing is super, super impressive. In some ways, I made the note that the tuning, the tonality on it, being kind of esoteric, kind of reminds me of like a FIO tuning in a way, but this is like what I feel like FIO is trying to achieve. The Spectrumica does it. It gives it kind of like this concert hall effect to it, this really wide stage. And I think a lot of that is coming from that bass presence, which is certainly excessive, and it almost becomes kind of like diffuse, right? It really does create like this wide sense of head stage. It's almost like disembodied in a sense. Lots of bass. I will say that the bass is not particularly well defined in this. Like if you're looking for that really tight, snappy attack on bass kick drums and stuff like that, like you're going to feel the physicality behind it, but you're not going to so much be able to make out like that initial attack event. It's not that clearly delineated, but it is nonetheless, I would say, pretty pleasant. But just overall, it's like you get this warm tilted sound signature that has, again, kind of that sparkling high without it ever being sharp or sibilant. Like I think the treble is generally pretty well balanced, if a little bit dark. But really, it's just like, again, kind of like this really impressive head stage that has a lot of sense of depth and width to it, but also kind of come across a little bit like Dolby-like, a little bit artificial, I suppose. And I would say in terms of like negatives, you know, partly there is that artificialness, right? It can just make it sound, I don't know, again, it makes a really strong first impression, although over longer listening sessions, I personally find myself still gravitating towards stuff that's tuned a little bit more neutral, but again, that's my preference. And I would say that the vocal clarity on the Spectrumica is kind of poor, especially when the bass kicks in, right? So if you're listening to music that is pretty simple and it's just vocal music, like I think it'll come across pretty well here in the Spectrumica. But if you're listening to a busy track, again, The Cure's Disintegration is an album I refer to a lot. Fairly busy music. The vocals really do take a back seat and they don't pull out a lot of micro contrast and detail, which is generally kind of my favorite thing that I'm looking for in sound. So that's generally my thoughts here on the Spectrumica, but I wanted to bring in a couple of other IEMs at a similar price point to kind of put everything into context and also kind of just talk about, again, this expensive IEM business and where it can and maybe can't make sense. So over here, we've got the Moondrop Solis 2. Price on this one's actually up now because of the state of the economy, to $3,000, right? So it's even more expensive than the Spectrumica. And what you get for that is, okay, you get a build quality that is even more ornate, I would say, dare I say, but also probably worse in a lot of ways versus the Spectrumica. This is a solid silver, as far as I understand, and you can see that it is heavily brushed and heavily textured. It's actually physically uncomfortable to put into my ears. I have to be very careful to not have this thing scratch or like pull my ear hairs, or I don't know exactly. Like, it almost feels like it's shocking me when I put it in my ears. It's pretty weird. It's pretty bizarre. So not my favorite aspect of this IEM, but probably a part of what goes into making it so expensive. But in terms of sound signature, this is where it's an interesting departure. So the Solis 2 is kind of going for a much more traditional sound signature, very much just a neutral, across the board, straight up sound signature that's not really doing anything to wow you. I mean, I think it does some things better. Like, I think the bass tactility and attack is better on the Solis. It's got the double dynamic driver that you get in the Blessing 3 and the Chronicle Dusk. So I really like that aspect of it, but of course it's a lot less bass than what you're going to get over here in the Spectrumica. And then otherwise, the mid-range tonality on this thing is frankly just about spot on for my preferences. I love the sound of this IEM, but I still don't really listen to it that much because it's kind of uncomfortable to fit. And frankly, like, it's just like a traditional kind of run-of-the-mill tuning. It's like, I feel like this is the kind of IEM, if you listen to these two at an audio show and you're wondering, where am I going to spend my $2,000? I think every day you're going to walk away with a Spectrumica, because it makes that impressive impression right out of the box that the Solis 2 frankly just doesn't. That said, like, overall, I would say I actually prefer the sound of the Solis 2, but it's not going to wow anyone, and it's going to have a hard time justifying its now $3,000 price point. It's just kind of frankly a little bit ordinary sounding, and you can get this kind of sound without having to spend $3,000. Whereas this sound, again, it's not necessarily my absolute favorite sound, but if this is your favorite sound, if this is the sound you want, I can't think of anything under $2,000 that does this. So there you go. Another IEM that I think is interesting to bring in for comparison is this. This is a 64 audio Volur, $2,500, also a hybrid set. So this was a quad brid. This is a tri-brid, so it's got ESTs, DDs, and BAs. And this one, I believe, is just a hybrid. So it's got, I think, 10 drivers, including 2 dynamic drivers. So that makes 8 balanced armatures. I can do the math. And tuning wise, I think this one kind of falls somewhere in between the Solis 2 and the Spectrumica. I think it's not quite as vanilla as the Solis 2, right? It does have a little bit more character to it. It is kind of an aggressive, assertive V-shaped sound signature on the Volur. But it's also kind of more in the realm of normal sounding, right? It's got a pretty significant bass boost, although it's got these adjustment apex modules that you can kind of tune how much bass you want out of it. The bass is overall, I think, going to be more tactile on the 64 audio. It is more defined, and so the attack on it is just going to be sharper. You're going to feel those kick drums and stuff more, but you're going to get less of that diffuse kind of stagey effect from the 64 audio versus the Spectrumica. And again, they're kind of trade-offs that are kind of natural when you're dealing with this sort of tonal balance difference. The upper treble on the 64 audio, some people have an issue. I personally don't have an issue with it. I think for me, it's balanced off pretty well with the bass, although I will say that I stick with the bassiest module because I feel like if I dial down the bass, then the upper treble starts to be a little bit irritating and just kind of a little artificial sounding over here. But overall, like, I think the 64 audio is like a nice kind of traditionally impressively technical set, but also maybe kind of lacks that wow factor that the Spectrumica has. But overall, in the long-term listening sessions, I might gravitate more toward the 64 audio because it's closer to a more normal sound signature that's going to do that vocal content a little bit better. But it's also, you know, it's not like really leaning into it. And maybe kind of the one-trick poniness of the Spectrumica might appeal to me a little bit more. So yeah, okay. Anything else I want to talk about? Okay, aesthetically. How gorgeous is that? It is understated, but that is a really good looking IEM. Okay, let us wrap up our review here of the iSlab Spectrumica. Again, 2,000 bucks. I think this is kind of what people expect of a $2,000 IEM. Again, I think this is something that you listen to in an audio show. Most people are going to walk away with a very strong first impression of this IEM. That said, for me personally, I feel like that effect kind of wears off a little bit. And as I kind of get to grips with just the mid-range performance and the quality of the vocal repro, it's not quite where I want it personally. But if you know that that's not necessarily your preference, you might actually like that as it is. For me, I'm going to give it a 3 stars. I think $2,000 is a lot of money to spend for any IEM, but at least the Spectrumica's justifying it with a very unique sound signature, as well as a build quality and accessories package that I think justifies the price. So if you want to check it out for yourself, of course, I'll have it linked in the description down below. But while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, join me on Discord, and I'll catch you on the next super review. There was something else I was supposed to say, but you'll get it for me. Take care.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the fish,